Serious, prison workers of Reddit. Have you ever met an ex-inmate of yours out of prison? If so, what happened? CEO in South Texas. Was shopping with my wife and ran into a huge 6 feet 7 inches HPL member that me and a co-worker had to take down due to his aggressiveness. All he did was shake my hand and asked how I was doing. Was honestly expecting shit to go down. Nice guy when he's not surrounded by his people that like to be his hats. I taught GED prep in a prison for about 6 years. And I saw a lot of inmates on the out. When I started, I lived next door to the halfway house. And used to see guys all the time. Find out how they were doing and so on. I'm Facebook friends with a few guys. One in particular worked as my TA in class. I'd let him run a class every now and then and he was an excellent teacher. He's been out for several years and runs an alternative education program in his old neighborhood. Helping dudes get their GED. We chat every now and then. He's doing great and really making a difference in the community. Former guard in TX here. Was filling my car with gas when I heard my last name being called. We wore name tags with our last name on them so inmates could call us Officer so and so. Ended up being a dude who was locked up free on parole. He walked towards me and we chit-chatted for a bit. Shook hands and all. Wished him well and he did the same for me. He said he always had respect for me because I was the same officer day in and day out every time I worked. They knew what they got with me and I also showed respect to all the inmates no matter what it was they did. We really had no way of knowing what they did to land in there but some would share freely if you asked them. I honestly did not remember the guy because you deal with thousands of inmates. The only ones I honestly remember were the staff support inmates that help you out and you delegate menial jobs to the BTC. Janitorial type sheet. Anyways. Pretty uneventful encounter. Nothing too dramatic here. I was a nurse practitioner for our county jail for a couple years. A few months ago I was drinking at a dive bar in the rougher side of town with friends. And a man came up to me and said I had been his provider there. And thanked me for taking care of him. Only once so far. I was doing hospital coverage and was sitting in the lobby of the hospital with another officer waiting a few minutes before we went up and relieved day shift. Someone got off the elevator and said, "Oh man, prison name brings guys down here? I can't believe I finally saw one of you guys on the outs." He continued walking with whoever he was with. I have no clue who he was. He may not have even recognized us if we hadn't been in uniform. I was a CO for a brief period of time and got my brother a job there just out of high school for an even shorter period of time. He hated working in the prison. A while later he tells me about this weird girl who added him on Facebook and is sending creepy messages. I looked her up and it turns out one of the former inmates was stalking him. I made him delete and block her immediately and warned him again about adding strangers. He'd been there so briefly he didn't recognize her name. Though she'd been a problematic inmate who I remembered distinctly for harassing him when he'd started working there. I always kept an eye out because it's a lot easier in a women's facility for them to file suit against male officers and I didn't want his navy to getting him in trouble. I was a correctional officer from 2003 to 2010. In early 2005 I switched from cable to DirecTV. And one of the two installers that came to my house was a former inmate. He didn't recognize me at first. But I could tell he had placed me by the end of the visit. Nothing bad came of it, he was an okay guy, but we had a policy that said we had to report encounters like that. Just in case of any future issues. After I reported it, that was the end of it. Though I think he came back to my jail later on an unrelated charge. I taught yoga to inmates for a few years. One guy was being released and on the morning of the first thing he did was renew his wedding vows with his wife at a nearby park. He invited me and a few of the other yoga teachers. All the inmates I taught to were very friendly. Especially given it was a high security prison. It is rare for an inmate to have a wife and family waiting for them after a 30-year imprisonment. I worked in a prison for 26 years and I met ex-inmates outside of prison a lot. Still do. Most of them stop and tell me how good they are doing and what line of work they are in now. Just a month ago, I was walking into the ice cream store and an ex-inmate driving by saw me and pulled over and got out of the car to talk to me a while. I always treated the inmates like adults and they knew what I expected of them. They knew that if they broke the rules and I found out, I would hold them accountable. They also knew that if they conducted themselves like adults I would not come around trying to find some gotcha rule violation. Never had to fight anyone in prison and all the guys I've run into on the outside have been smiling when they are talking to me. I think it worked out. Forensic psychiatry psychologist here. I once went canoeing and there was a group of big bulky tattooed guys who looked to be right wing and most likely were starting a route next to my group of friends. One of them was an ex-patient who had murdered his drinking buddy and carefully cleaned the flat 4 hours after. He has been working in a janitor service for about 2 years now and is still sober as far as I know. I just discreetly said hello and he discreetly said hello and none of my friends noticed. Another ex-patient who had killed his wife sold me a fish sandwich a while ago. Not sure if he still does that. It happens now and then but it isn't really exciting to be honest. New York Co here. Saw an ex-inmate while getting coffee. Yelled at him to take his do-rag off and he jumped and said AWW sheet co you can't do that sheet no more. For those curious, I am in Philadelphia. Not the most friendly city, not the least violent. Truth be told, any one of us posting could be an inmate. Tonight. They are men and women. Some much worse than others. But it's a job. I had 192 on my block and I knew every single one of them either by name or nickname. There were 4 blocks of 192. 3 blocks of 64 and the mental health services wing with 200 plus. And that was just in my facility. I used to have inmates tell me on my first day back after days of thank God you're back. This place is off the hook when you're gone. I've had dudes admit to me dare. Cry that their women left them. Introduce me to their family in the visiting room. I didn't take any sheet. But I also didn't start any either. Yes. I worked in a medium security prison as an instructor teaching the less fortunate incarcerated English and language arts. One day I was entering a business and saw 2 of my ex-students inmates in the same parking lot. We chatted. They were working and keeping clean. All was good. I used to work as a federal CO. I met a guy that was a couple years ahead of me in HS that I was acquaintances with before my job his incarceration who was locked up at my FCI. While I worked there, I could have had him moved to a different prison if it was a problem and if I did it would have took him far away from his family. He stayed out of my way and let me do my job without trying me. So I treated him like he was just any other inmate. I wasn't a big dig about executing my duties with anyone. I always just did my job. Anyway, I bumped into him in a bar after I quit and he was released. We exchanged the what's up head nod and went about our business. That was the end of it. I'm a college student working in a variety of correctional facilities doing life skills prep and tutoring. One of the inmates I had been teaching eventually got out and I ran into him the next week afterwards at a probation program for juveniles where I also worked. The facility has a gym where the kids play basketball. And a classroom where we teach. It's a very well-known location in the community I work in. He was found shooting up in the bathroom of the program's facility. And we immediately threw him out and called the police. Not as interesting a story as the ones in this thread. But a story nonetheless. Retired corrections here. I see them all the time. The ones doing well come right up. I can tell by the old title I had at the time they were in, SGT, LT, Captain, etc. Approximately what years we were in contact. They ask me if I remember them, usually no, and tell me what they've been doing and how happy they are out in the world. The ones not doing well are, quite obviously, going out of their way to avoid me. Many years ago, I had just sat down at a Chicai's for lunch, no cracks please. I loved their rice. A guy appeared to be cleaning up the place in our section. After about the 4th time he cleaned a brass rail near me in the last 5 minutes. I went up to him and asked him what his problem was. He said I looked like a guy he used to know. When I asked his prison number, He said, "It is you, Inspector." I told him to find someplace else to clean. While I was waiting for our Luke to arrive, I saw him stop our server and go back towards the kitchen. The server then brought our food to us. But looked funny. I asked him what that convicted to our food. He said nothing. I got up and got the manager and told him what I saw. When she questioned the server, he started crying and said if he told that guy, the ex-prisoner, would beat his ass. She told him he would not be fired and she would call the police if necessary. Our server told them he hocked a big ol' batch of snot and blew it in my meal and mixed it in with his finger. He was fired. Then arrested because he was acting like a convict. His parole was violated and he went back to prison. Never saw him again. I worked on the inmate telephone system for the Wisconsin dock for 8+ years. Towards the end I was at a Brewers game one day walking down the crowded concourse and hear someone loudly say, "Hey, there goes the telephone man." Most of the former inmates I have run into have been positive interactions. Anyone who works in corrections will tell you that they will typically treat you on the outside with the same respect you give them on the inside. Even if there have been instances where you may have had to go hands-on with them. Deep down they understand that you have a job to do despite what they might feel in the heat of the moment. And as long as you never take things to level higher than necessary, they can almost see why you did it later on and even sometimes be appreciative, believe it or not. I've actually run into a few of them at the college I'm finishing my degree at currently. And I shit you not, had some guys come up and tell me how I had an influence on them wanting to get their lives together. It is one hell of a feeling. I gotta say, one of my favorite lines that I tell them at work is that I am a corrections officer, not a punishment officer. If I can do anything within appropriate reason to keep you from spiraling down the drain with life once you are released, I will do it. Nobody in society has anything to gain from a person sitting behind bars pissing their life away, myself included. I was a correctional officer and sergeant for about 6 years. I left corrections and had been with the police for 14 years. I have encountered many inmates on the street while on and off duty. I never once had a problem. However, I was once bear hugged by an inmate who was happy to see me and tell me how well he was doing. I once had an inmate simply nod at me and acknowledge my presence and everything in between. I was young when I started. Never had an issues to speak of inside and gained a pretty high level of respect from the inmate population. System-wide. I was never assaulted. But I used quite a bit of force. It's prison. It happens. I once arrested a dude who had carjacked someone. I spotted the car and attempted to stop him. He stopped the car and fled on foot. Ordinarily, I'd drive as long as I could as he ran. But he stopped the stolen car in such a way that I couldn't maneuver my car around it. I simply jumped into the stolen car and drove that until I was able to get out on foot and run. Apparently, he recognized me and just surrendered. As I tackled him to the ground, he kept saying my last name, which was strange. Turns out, he was one of my inmate workers in the prison who would clean for me. When he saw it was me who was chasing him, he decided not to fight. Many lols were had. Probably late to reply. But oh well. I've had 2 so far. The first was like many others here. An inmate recognized me at a gas station and shook my hand. I worked in the education department after 5 years working in general population where they train inmates in different trades. Welding is fairly popular, and they can earn a bachelor's degree. This person in particular was a graduate and from what I gathered after our chat had gotten his life together and was doing well. The next was on Christmas actually. My parents came to visit but I was still at work. After getting off I picked up my wife and we all planned to eat dinner at Denny's. My wife and I arrived first. Found a table. And she went to the bathroom real quick. I was still in uniform. Sitting alone at the table when I noticed this guy staring at me. I didn't recognize him. But I did recognize his tattoos. Most of them were Tango Blast. He gave me the stink eye the entire time and I just looked right back at him until my wife came back. He left shortly after. I'm not entirely certain why he would be angry with me. Or it was probably just the uniform. I had a decent reputation in prison that was built with respect, other than the occasional knucklehead. I never really lost sleep over it however.